Welcome to today's webinar, Improving Resiliency Through Planning and Investment in Place-Based Food Systems, Lessons Learned from the Mid-Atlantic, hosted by the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. My name is Michael Bayer. I am Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network supported by the U.S. EPA Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website, smartgrowth.org, that serves as your one-stop on the web for the most current information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. We provide news and information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and resources to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is also the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Clearinghouse on smart growth topics, available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. We are recording this webinar and will post it on our website in the next few days under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to get the latest news and information about smart growth and to learn about our upcoming webinars. You can also find out about planning initiatives and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1.5 CNU ACEU credits. I will note that CNU has confirmed that those of you who have participated in the past live webinars are eligible for the CNU credits through this webinar series. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org. Log into your account and search for the name of today's event, which is Improving Resiliency Through Planning and Investment in Place-Based Food Systems, Lessons Learned from the Mid-Atlantic. You can also search for event number 918-8561. And I will note at the outset that Phil Gottwals, who was supposed to be on this webinar, is ill today, and so we are fortunate to have Michelle Miller substitute for him. So to get started, I'll tell you a little bit about our speakers, who are Lindsay Smith and Michelle Miller. Lindsay Smith has been working with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, COG, to develop a regional food systems program for the past several years. Earlier this year, the program published an update to COG's unique What Our Region Grows report with its regional agricultural work group. During her career, Lindsay has worked as an urban planner, consulted on land conservation, served as a food council coordinator, and consulted with philanthropy on strengthening regional food systems in metropolitan Washington, D.C. She is a member of several local agricultural organizations and graduated in July of 2018 from Valor, an agricultural leadership development program in Virginia. Lindsay serves as the Vice President of Communications for the National Capital Area Chapter of the American Planning Association and has master's degrees from the University of Michigan in Environmental Policy and City, Urban, Community, and Regional Planning. Michelle Miller is a researcher and associate director at the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, the Sustainable Agricultural Research Center on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. She is a practicing economic anthropologist engaged in participatory action research with farmers and their communities. Since 2000, she has worked with fruit growers to assist their efforts to reduce pesticide risk and build regional markets. Her current projects focus on agriculture of the middle and regional food economies, food freight transportation and logistics, labor and land tenure, perennial agriculture, resiliency, and climate change. She holds degrees in landscape architecture with an emphasis on regional planning and restorative ecology, and on sustainable development with an emphasis on agriculture and food. Following the presentations, our panelists will answer as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question anytime during the presentation by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to get us started. Welcome, Lindsay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us from around the country. We're really excited to share some information, not just from Greater Washington with you, but also from the Midwest And again, I also want to echo my thanks to Michelle Miller for sharing some of the work that they're doing. Actually, some of the freight work that they've done in the Madison, Wisconsin, Chicago area has influenced some programming that we have done here in Greater Washington. So with that, I'm just going to start my timer real quick and tell you a little bit about the Council of Governments. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the District of Columbia, Suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia. We're a diverse, dynamic region. We're home to over 5 million people and one of the nation's largest economies. And in between now and 2045, we are forecasting 1 million new residents and jobs will be added to this region. We have had a small agriculture program since 2006. This was started by my supervisor, Brian Lecouture, who is a farmer and urban forester here at the Council of Governments. And as Michael mentioned, this year we released a pretty unique report called What Our Region Grows. It was first put out in 2012, and the folks who helped us write this report work with farmers and increasingly food business owners on a daily basis. Those are our agricultural marketing business specialists from some of the counties that you see here in the map. Soil conservation district staff. We recently invited our food policy council directors, of which we have a growing number in our region, to join this group. We have some farmers and we have some nonprofit technical assistance providers in the group who work on everything from land conservation to market development for farmers. I will just note real quick, I am going to switch back and forth a bit as our report does between the COG region, which is outlined here in blue, and what we call the Washington agricultural region, which is outlined in yellow. There's a longer explanation for why we looked at agriculture, why we continue to look at agriculture at a slightly bigger scale than our Council of Governments region. But I'll just note when I'm giving you data, which one they're from. But just quickly, the jurisdictions outlined in blue are our COG member jurisdictions that come to the Council of Governments to do regional transportation planning, planning for homeland security, emergency management, a lot of planning around the Chesapeake Bay. We have a climate and energy program. Affordable housing is increasingly a part of our portfolio, forecasting, and the like. And just quickly for reference, the Washington Ag region is about 8,600 square miles and home to about 7 million people. So we were able to strengthen and broaden our agricultural program several years ago through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and local philanthropy to start a broader regional food systems program. And one of the things that allowed us to do was update our What Our Region Grows report. We used a variety of data sources for it, a lot of USDA data from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which puts out the U.S. Census of Agriculture, to the Economic Research Service, which has some data on per capita consumption of different food items. We were also greatly helped by a USDA-funded project called Enhancing Food Security in the Northeast, which I'd strongly recommend checking out. A very interdisciplinary project looking at the Northeast region's capacity to feed itself, to enhance food security, to help farmers maintain and grow strong businesses, all in the face of a changing climate. But that study developed a regional data set on crop yield, which we use for an exercise I'll show you in a few minutes. As we finished this report and started presenting it to our COG committees made up of elected officials from around our region, community and business leaders, One of the things that we really wanted to convey was just the significant economic impact that agriculture has in the region. On this slide, you are seeing numbers from the District of Columbia, Maryland and Virginia. For Maryland and Virginia, it is just for the COG jurisdictions. So for instance, the Virginia number on 2.23 billion in economic impact from agriculture and forestry is only for Northern Virginia. I believe that number is 70 billion for the entire state. It is the leading industry in both Maryland and Virginia in terms of employment, and in Virginia in terms of economic impact. This is based on 2015 data from 3 different studies, and one of the challenges we have working in our metropolitan region on agriculture is finding data sets that are comparable across jurisdictions. So these were 3 studies which pulled similar data, but were not done as one study and really can't be taken as apples to apples comparisons. So economic impact is one thing, but what kind of trends are we seeing in terms of number of farms, types of production, land and farms in a very rapidly urbanizing region? We are seeing a ongoing decline in farms and the amount of land in farms. For the commodities and agricultural products that we looked at in our report, generally, with some exceptions, we are seeing lower production levels. The dairy industry is in crisis in the Northeast and in our region, and I think that Michelle is going to speak a bit more about that than I will. Grain and forage for animals, whether it's horses in the equine industry, cattle and calves, a livestock industry, dominate production in the Washington agricultural region. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of growth in on-farm craft beverage operations, farm wineries, farm breweries, distilleries, agritourism operations, where farmers are diversifying their revenue stream by offering different types of on-farm experiences. It could be pick your own pumpkins. It could be farm events like weddings. We're seeing tremendous growth in urban agriculture in our metro region, and this is one area where I look forward and hope that we have some federal data gathering on this in the future. This can be a challenge to collect at the local level depending on what support exists for agriculture, but this space is changing quickly as well in our region. And in fact, DC is establishing an Office of Urban Agriculture in our Department of Energy and the Environment. We are also seeing growth in direct-to-consumer sales from farmers. And with the 2017 Census of Agriculture data that was released in April by USDA, we have seen a very modest increase in net farm income since 2012 in the Washington Ag region. I should mention that all of the data in the What Our Region Grows report that I'll share a link to at the end is from 2012 and previous years. The Census of Agriculture is done once every 5 years, and we did not have the 2017 data when we updated our report and released it, with some exceptions. And we will be working to do an updated release in the coming year. We are also seeing an increasing interest in healthy soils for not just the benefits that it can provide to nutrient management and runoff to the Chesapeake Bay, but increasingly for carbon sequestration. And here are just 2 photos of different types of farming operations that you'll find in metropolitan Washington. One thing that we did with our regional ag work group is we created in our report a local experiences section for every county and the District of Columbia in the COG region. This is from Loudoun County, Virginia, and it shows you a combination of federal data, state data, federal data in this case being the ag sales number. State data is from an economic impact study done at the University of Virginia. And then farms, farmers, and farmland is also federal data. Agriculturally assessed acres, another way for us to look at how much land is in agriculture, is county and county level data. Preserved farm acres we're getting from our counties. Farmland value we're getting from a combination of state and county sources. And then the data in the lower part, farmers markets, community supported agriculture operations or CSAs, community gardens, school gardens, distilleries, wineries. That is 2017 data by and large, and a lot of it is locally collected. I think we're just going to continue to see progress here as we continue to invest in the food and ag economy, both in the accuracy of the data, but how we're able to compare it across jurisdictions. But it's pretty exciting to think about the change that's happened just since we put out the 2012 report in our food and ag landscape, despite some of the broader concerning trends. Another exercise that we did in What Our Region Grows is we looked at the region's ability to rely on itself for food and different types of food items. And this gets back to some of the data sets that I mentioned earlier. We do very much live in a global food system, and our food is coming from a whole variety of sources, local, regional, a lot of food, of course, from California, the West Coast, Florida. In our region, we get quite a bit of local regional food from Pennsylvania. But this was a conceptual exercise to say, based on what we're producing and the number of people that are living here, what percent of demand for this type of food are we fulfilling? And in most cases, we're not particularly close to meeting demand, although there are some exceptions. I will say that some of the production acres that you see there, we've actually seen some small increases in 2017 from 2012, but by and large, the overall percent of demand that we're able to meet is it's not going to change much, and the major driver of this is growth in population. But we did see, we are seeing, oops, sorry about that. We are seeing some greater amounts of production in things like strawberries, pumpkins, squash, grapes, and I believe most of that is wine grapes. Continued decline in dairy, unfortunately. And then there was one more thing I was going to say about this before going to the next slide, but maybe come back to it. Getting into farmers, farms, and farmland, here is a look at the Washington Ag region. The blue line at the top, number of farmers. We have seen an increase since the last census in 2012. Number of farms and farmland overall, though, continues to decline. And part of the increase is that we are seeing more people get into farming. There was also a change in how the National Ag Statistics Service, which does the Census of Agriculture, asked about farmers in the census, and that is potentially a factor here as well. In our report, we also look at things like the generational change that's happening in the farm community in our region, both in terms of farmer age, the number of years that folks have been farming, We also look at the face of farming in our region. How many female farmers do we have? How many African American, Latino, Hispanic and Latino, Asian American, Native American farmers do we have in our region? By and large, most of our, the majority of the farm operators in our region identify as white. There's been a small growth in minority farmers since 2012, but as a percentage of overall operators, they continue to comprise a small number of farmers. They're captured by the Census of Agriculture. I have some resources at the end that we looked to in our report, and I think we'll continue to look to. We mentioned, you know, thinking about place-based systems, place-based food systems as a way for us to address issues of sustainability, equity, and resiliency. And I would just say that this is not a report that focuses on equity, but it is, I think, a key consideration for our region and others moving forward to think about how we can convey what's happening in the growing and diverse food and farm economy that we have. One really interesting thing that I've seen anecdotally in our region is that a lot of our urban farms tend to be owned and operated and led by farmers of color, which is, I think, a very exciting trend. We don't have a way to capture urban agriculture across our region in a way that I think is descriptive of what's happening, but I'm optimistic about the opportunities for us to do a better job on that in the future. I would also just mention, in terms of who our farmers are, I apologize for the pause. I'm just trying to keep an eye on time here. But 13% of the farmers in our Washington agricultural region are veterans. And despite the increase that we're seeing in the number of farmers, a greater percentage reported that they have a primary job or occupation other than farming in 2017 than they did in 2012. And that number is already quite high. I'm going to try to speed things up here a bit. This is getting back to land and farms. What I showed you previously was for that larger Washington agricultural region. We track land and farms in the council, in our Council of Governments region, and in our jurisdictions who are members, through our Region Forward vision document for a more sustainable, prosperous, livable region. That is kind of our guiding document at the Council of Governments. And so we've been tracking land and farms since Region Forward was created about 10 years ago. And we found out this spring with the release of the 2017 Census of Agriculture data that we had dropped below the sustainability goal that we set for maintaining about 500,000 acres of land and farms through Region Forward. One of the things that we've also, been talking with some of our COG committees about the importance of farmland in our region, not just outside of our COG region, is that there's an increasing amount of science and information and interest in the benefits that healthy soils can provide. So when we presented what our region grows to our Chesapeake Bay and Water Resources Policy Committee, we also had a professor from the University of Maryland Cooperative Extension present on the benefits of healthy soils. And she is actually a climate specialist who works with farmers to help them increase their on-farm resiliency in the face of a changing climate and to protect their investments. So here are some of the benefits that healthy soils convey, both to the farm but also to our broader communities. And it's yet one more argument for why we really need to protect as much farmland as we possibly can that remains. Just quickly, and I think Michelle may mention this, or I hope that she will, because we're having very different years in the Northeast than we are in the Midwest. We had record rainfall last year in the Mid-Atlantic, and this is a picture from the farm at Sunnyside, which is in Rappahannock County in Northern Virginia, and it's a farm that does a lot to manage their soils to build healthy, complex soils that can retain a lot of water, but we're seeing events that are challenging even the best managed soils. And I think the point I forgot to mention earlier on the 2017 Census of Ag data was I was just really grateful that the Census of Ag was not collected in 2018 for our region, because the numbers would have just been kind of in the tank. There were significant impacts to farmers, their property, production levels, and sales that year. I'm going to skip through this real quick and just mention that the report has 6 major recommendations, one of which is to create some kind of regional committee or commission on food and agriculture to start doing both near-term but longer-term strategic thinking about how we need to plan for the vitality of agriculture going forward in the region. Everything from, how can we ensure that best practices are being shared that help promote land access for the next generation of farmers, to connecting food entrepreneurs to capital and other assets that they need, to thinking more about, what are some of the environmental benefits that agriculture can convey, what are some of the quality of life issues that, we can be addressed if we have some more coordinated planning and thinking around how to support the diversity of food entrepreneurs and farmers that call our region home, and lift up a lot of the really exciting innovation that's happening, not just in urban spaces, but in many of our rural communities as well, of which we still have a significant number. So our next steps here at the Council of Governments, I apologize if I'm running through this a little too quickly, is we created a time-limited advisory task force of elected officials to help us assess regional capacity, interest, and resources to implement the report's recommendations. We interviewed over 40 leaders, elected officials, food and farm experts, business owners, community leaders, nonprofit leaders. And the exciting news is what we're working towards is forming some kind of 10-year regional food and ag economy commission that can help us move towards a goal of a more resilient, connected food and farm economy across our urban, suburban, and rural communities in the region. And, quite frankly, to look at some of the trends that we've pointed out and what's working in our region, what we can learn from each other, what we might be able to scale working together. I think with that, I'm going to run through some resources really, really quickly, but I'm just about going to turn it over to Michelle and say thank you again for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the question and answer. I just want to mention quickly, if you're in our region or interested in learning more about food and agriculture in our region, here are a couple resources that I would highly recommend. We were helped greatly in our Face of Farming section in our What Our Region Grows report by a needs assessment of Black farmers on the Delmarva Peninsula. For those of you who may be from other parts of the country, it's the eastern shore of Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware, the Delmarva. and also the Chesapeake Foodshed Assessment that Phil Gottwals and his team worked on through the Harry R Hughes Center for Agroecology. I can't recommend that highly enough. They do look at a bigger study area, and I think two things I just say about that really quickly is that it's really focused on, you know, what do we need to do to address food security concerns, food access concerns, building the next generation, helping to support the next generation of farmers and food entrepreneurs, with some very practical recommendations about what that's going to require. It's a fantastic study. And while our study, for instance, looked at, you know, we did this hypothetical exercise on our ability to support our own food needs here, the Foodshed Assessment went a step further and ran an in-plan analysis to look at how much product is actually staying in our region. Let me just skip ahead to some other resources. There's a growing number of resources on food and farming. I would encourage you, if you don't know some of your local experts who I mentioned that form our regional ag work group, to get to know them. Also, our land-grant universities are just, you know, an incredible source of information. I will mention real quickly, because we may have a number of planners on the call. If you're a member of the American Planning Association, there is a food systems information group. I think I actually misspelled that, and I apologize. I think it's an interest group, but you do not have to be a member of APA to sign up for their listserv, and they are actually in the process of becoming a division of APA, you know, putting food on a more equal footing with some of our other planning concerns. So let me stop there and turn it over to Michelle.
So thanks everybody for joining us today, and to Michael and Lindsay for reaching out. I'm super thrilled to be on the call with you and to share with you a little bit about what we've learned in the upper Midwest. I work at the Center for Integrated Ag Systems. We're a participatory action research center, so we work primarily with farmers. And we got involved in this project when farmers were asking us, why can't we sell food into Chicago? Why can't we make any money doing that? It's crazy. So we started to look into the why of that. I want to start with a slide. Let's bring it up. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this slide. It's been around for about a decade, but I think it's a great way to just look at where we are in our region. You can see that the Chicago is down at the bottom of the Great Lakes down here. This is Chicago, and this is Minneapolis. This region, going from Chicago up and around down to these, through those cities, is the area that we work on, and it's got about 21 million people in it. Unlike regions on the East Coast, we've got quite a bit of farmland still available to grow food, and so there are quite a bit of farmers, you know, startups and beginning farmers in this region. But the two big cities really drive and have different market access issues in them. Oh, and I just wanted to mention too, you can see that there are, each of these mega regions is shaped differently, is near different kinds of growing regions, farming regions, has probably very different issues that face them. So every region is going to have its own characteristics. So I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that this is not just something that we're working on in our regions or nationally or in North America even. The UN and their environment program and the Food and Agriculture Organization have been very involved in looking at food systems and what it means for both developing and developed countries. And one of the things they've been pointing out is that there is quite a bit of difference between what developing and developed countries need. The UN's done a lot in developing countries, but we haven't done nearly as much, I don't think, in North America, specifically in the United States. This was in New York Times, what was it, yesterday? Why is it so hard to buy real food in farm country? So we think about access a lot, but we don't really think about rural access as much. And so there are definitely rural food access issues that need to be addressed in our efforts to improve our food system. And the funny thing is that rural and urban access is really, problems are really happening for much the same reason. And what we found was that part of this reason is the way the market is structured. These are all different organizations and efforts that are trying to restructure markets to make food access better and also make market access better for farmers. So this logo up at the top, the World Union of Wholesale Markets, they're very strong globally. China hosted this year's meeting, and Phil Gottwals, the presenter who's unable to join us today, was scheduled to be a keynote at that meeting. Of all of the wholesale markets in the United States, Maryland is the only one that is a member of this union and has given a lot of leadership to that effort. I also wanted to mention that we've been working on developing a regional food terminal facility here in the Madison area. We've been looking at the Oscar Mayer plant for that. There's, I'm going to speak later about why we decided to really focus our efforts on that. Equal Exchange is a company that's now a worker co-op, and they've been working on market access as well, and concentration in markets. And then Dairy Together is another effort that's been going on. It's a multi-state effort for farmers to work together with their co-ops to support supply management so that we're not overloading markets. So I'm going to go a little bit through the why, how we got here, why we're doing what we're doing. As I said, we kind of went into the weeds about, I don't know, 8 years ago, trying to figure some of this stuff out, and it was a pretty complex situation, but it was good to go through and kind of sort it out. So we talk a lot about moving food to people, but we talk less about moving, we talk a lot about moving people to food, but less about moving food to people. Especially transportation planners, I think, have done an excellent job thinking about bus transportation and walkable neighborhoods and things like that. But I think how we make sure that we do the most efficient movement of food to people is really important. So this was a historical change over time. We had a very strong distribution system, regional, local distribution in the 60s. But when fuel prices started going crazy in the 70s, companies started to get really serious about saving and making the most efficient use of the fuel that they had available. In the 80s, we had a shakeup in the labor market. Supply chains started privatizing and vertically integrating. At that point, in the 90s, we saw big box really come out in a big way. Logistics, as we globalized, made a big launch into the scene, and bigger companies are doing a lot of logistical analysis. In 2000s, we saw really strong consolidation and the rise of some of these access issues for both markets and food. And then by the 2010s, climate volatility started really weighing in. Lindsay mentioned this really briefly about soil loss and extreme weather, and we're definitely seeing that here. We are having much more rain than we normally would, and very intense events that cause a lot of erosion and road washout. Also, any areas that have been built on existing, pre-existing wetlands or kind of wet areas are filling back in with water. So in 2015, the National Academies Press came out with a whole book talking about how the food system is in a complex adaptive system. And so it's got a lot of moving parts and pieces to it, and it's not easy to just like target one little piece and not have it affect the whole piece. A number of other books came out also that talked about how the food supply chains are formed and how food marketing environment has changed over time. So complex adaptive systems, some of you may be familiar with these. I think this chart has helped me a lot thinking about how complex adaptive systems are organized. And what we really are looking for is a self-organizing systems kind of in the middle there, where you've got a nice balance between certainty in the system and agreement in the system. So when a complex adaptive system is really highly organized, it's not as resilient because it doesn't quickly respond to changes, whereas a self-organizing system can respond to changes much more quickly. Same thing with an unorganized system. If it's unorganized, then it's very hard for it to respond to changes, as things like risk increases with climate change, for instance. So in a complex adaptive system, and this is in any kind of complex adaptive system, there are at least 4 characteristics that are necessary for the system to adapt and evolve in response to outside issues. Diversity, flow, non-linearity, and aggregation. So those are 4 characteristics. I'm going to go through those really quickly. So diversity. We've talked a lot about just what kind of food is available for us to eat in various regions. Lindsay's kind of 2012 data on what's actually eaten in a region versus what's grown there is an example of looking at some of those diversity issues. Do we grow what we eat at all? So one of the things that happened historically was that there was a lot of volatility seasonally with fruit and vegetable production in especially the more northern regions. And so a lot of that production has moved to the fruitful rim, which is the states along the southern and western coast of the United States. So, and Mexico also. So, apples coming out of Washington State and Oregon, and we've got, avocados and almonds coming from California, but we also have a large amount of broccoli coming from California, a lot of carrots coming from California, things that we could be growing in our region, but that when product floods the market, it lowers the price, and then our farmers in more northern climates can't compete. So this oversimplified and highly efficient production and distribution system created unintended environmental disruptions as well. Things like salinization of the soil in California, too much irrigation to grow all those vegetables, and even alfalfa and other crops has led to salinization. So those are some of the kinds of disruptions that have happened. I think the real key piece is that we're trying to optimize diversity in products and supply chain ownership at multiple scales and in different parts of the food system so that we can optimize our resiliency in the system. So I had a chance to go, I've been going to sustainable ag events most of my life, and the narratives there are always about diversity. How do we add more diversity to the system? How many more crops can we grow? How will that improve the soil health? And how do we help more diverse groups of farmers participate? How do we, explore different business organization structures? All kinds of different diversity are discussed. However, you go to food transportation or agricultural crop transportation, freight transportation conferences, and what you hear is efficiency. How do we make the system as efficient as absolutely possible? And I think what's the kind of the new way of thinking about this has been to look at what the optimal balance is between efficiency and diversity in attaining resilience. So I just want to put that out there. I know it's been helpful for me when I go to meetings to listen to how people are talking about it and what the narratives are, so that I can help balance that perspective a little bit. Food flow. So this is the really fun one for me. Regional food flow right now is insufficiently organized, at least in the upper Midwest. You guys are blessed with the Maryland food terminal, and so that really makes a big difference in how the market access for your farmers. But we don't have anything like that. At the same time, Chicago is an epicenter for private food warehousing, with food moving from the West Coast to the East Coast, and Chicago acting like a gateway. We really need these last mile public terminals for smaller supply chains to survive, and the logistics for small supply chains are underdeveloped and lack analytics. This article just came out at the end of July, and it's based on a whole bunch of food flow work that Lynn and colleagues at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana have put together. This is based on freight analysis framework data, and you can see where some of the really big food flows are in the country. Now, I want to just mention that an issue with this is there's a lot of noise in this study. There's a lot of non-food that is in this in the data that they used. They used 2012 data, and then it included all the corn and soybean transportation. Of course, most of the corn and soybeans produced are not for human consumption, they're for animal consumption. And we do also eat animals, but I think it almost kind of double counts in a way. And it also includes a lot of export movement and flow, which is not necessarily what we're hoping to look at. So I've been working with them, with the team, to talk about how we might do a next set of articles to look at food flow. A little bit on nonlinearity. So, you know, rather than a common characteristic of a complex adaptive system is that it'll move along very slowly, and then all of a sudden it'll make a big jump, and that's called the nonlinear system. For instance, in agriculture, you've got a temporal element where you have, you know, different seasons where you can grow different products, and it creates a kind of a pulse in the system. There are also geographic nonlinearities where you've got a route where you have to go around and through mountains and lakes and rivers, things like that. That creates a nonlinearity. The other thing that causes nonlinearity is when you have a longer supply chain. So you get a bullwhip effect, essentially, and you need more agreement in the system to ensure that the chain can function. That agreement is there are a number of ways to reach that agreement. One is through trust and communication. There might be other ways to reduce risk inside that complex adaptive system. One of those things that you can do is vertically integrate. So instead of having a series of independent businesses working together, you have one business that absorbs the risk along the entire supply chain and then can organize it to balance out over time. The problem, of course, is that then you don't have multiple independent businesses, and that's one thing that we're trying to increase, not decrease. So then the other element that's critical in a complex adaptive system is aggregation, and there are a number of critical thresholds that can be identified, and we did through our study in the Chicago region. So looking at the distance to aggregation and processing, I'm wondering if that first mile trip segment, if that's a point of sale, or if it's not, if it's still in the ownership of the farmer. Looking at over the road and regional trip segments, you know, the distance to wholesale market is a critical threshold. If it's too far, then it requires the truck driver to stay overnight. Then maybe you need a truck cab. It creates all sorts of inefficiencies in the system, and that having a regional trip segment is actually much more efficient overall. And then there's issues around last mile trip segment, truck size, traffic congestion, all those kinds of questions. So then I wanted to talk about, I've lost my timer here, sorry. Okay, 2 minutes. So there are a bunch of barriers to innovation, and what's interesting is that there are two kinds of innovation that you can use, and human organization is one, and it's actually much harder, but it's less money, it costs less money. And then there's technology where you can, you know, put out quite a bit of money and add innovative things that improve the supply chain. So what's happening is that the very big companies are buying into the technology, and the smaller companies can't afford to do that unless they organize and they work together to collaborate. So again, here's the complex adaptive system. We're looking at trying to move into the self-organizing space where you've got modest agreement and modest certainty. If certainty and risk increases, then you need more agreement. You need more people coming together and working together. There are a number of organizational innovations to increase agreement: regionalization, open source, connectivity through broadband. Everybody's got to get on broadband somehow. And then there are technological innovations, and this is something that Phil Gottwals really brought to mind for me and helped me understand ways that distributed ledger can be useful for collaborations of independent businesses in a supply chain. For an example, multi-tenant apps, machine learning, digital twins, innovations in engineering for trucks, hybrid electric renewables, load matching systems, automated material handling. All of these innovations are really key. So ultimately, you need farmers to make money for what they do to stay in business. If they're too small and they're too diverse, they're operating under economic thresholds. And if they're too big, they're overly efficient and they're operating beyond environmental limits. So we're trying to find what is the just right place, and serving regional markets, wholesale markets, seems to be part of that equation. There are a number of regional market requirements. The distance between production and markets is a really key piece. There has to be enough production to fill trucks, larger trucks. There needs to be affordable cold storage, diversity for healthy soils, but enough efficiency to streamline movements. So just in a wrap up, food is a right, it's not a privilege. And so physical and economic access to food is important. Oh, I turn this off, there we go. And it's really important to increase the food flow first, and then neighborhood groceries will emerge, as opposed to the other way around. Often we think, let's set up a grocery store, and then people have a hard time filling the shelves with food on a regular basis and at a price point that's affordable for the community. If we can increase the food flow, we think that it's a way of avoiding gentrification also, so that local people and neighborhoods can own their own businesses. There's a whole bunch of information we're learning more about what terminals need to be successful. Maryland already has a terminal, and Phil can certainly talk to that more than I can. And then, Lindsay talked a lot about using data to understand all this stuff. One of the things that we really need is a detailed, dynamic understanding of food flow at the national and regional levels. I think the team at University of Illinois is onto something. They've got some really great models. Now we just need to get the right data into those models so that we can start to see how food flow is really operating at the national and regional levels. And then there's a bunch of things around algorithms to understand seasonal logistics so that small businesses can take advantage of that. Drive time analysis, food access emergency planning data. There's a bunch of things that we need out of data systems. And so I think with that, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Lindsay. We've been collecting the questions and received several throughout the webinar posed by the audience, and we're not going to move into the question and answer session. To remind you, you can continue to submit questions as we move into the discussion. We'll answer as many as we can until about 2:30 Eastern. And our two presenters are putting on their webcam so we can see them during this part of it. And I'm going to start, and I'll just note, I think, Lindsay, you mentioned earlier the APA group, and we did get someone that confirmed that it is the APA Food Systems Planning Interest Group. So those of you interested in that, you can go in and look up that information. Okay, so I'll start, Lindsay, with some questions that we received earlier on in your portion. I guess the first one will be, is demand calculated using typical consumption rates and population?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And I should say that in our report, we have several appendices, one of which goes through the exact methodology that we used and data sources and data sets that we use to calculate demand for different items. We had regionally specific information on crop and animal carcass yield for our area in terms of the amount of different types of food that we tracked that farmers are able to grow in our region as opposed to having, say, a national average. But the demand factors, that is a national data set. Okay.
Similarly, I guess another question about the data was all the report compiled from secondary data sources, or was some data collected specifically for the report?
Great question. By and large, it was largely secondary data, federal sources. I mentioned the Enhancing Food Security study in the Northeast. They compiled some data that we then used, but that was also from federal sources. In terms of primary data collection, some of our jurisdictions, well, I would say most of our jurisdictions at this point are tracking things like urban farms, school gardens, community gardens. I think only in like 1 or 2 cases did we do that ourselves. That was at the county level. I will say at the municipal, we have many, many municipalities in our region, and we don't necessarily have that data for all of our municipalities. I'd say the primary data collection was limited to looking at things like how many of our jurisdictions now have tax incentives, for instance, for urban farming. It was a little bit more qualitative data gathering, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just mention very quickly,
okay. Sure.
The report took us about 2 years to write. We had the assistance of a great food systems intern, Jimmy Hsu, who's a graduate of the University of Maryland's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Okay.
Jimmy's working with us on our project here in Madison also.
Yes, yes, he's now consulting full-time.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay. I guess the next question here would be, I guess, about chicken ownership. How are urban municipalities regulating chicken ownership for the purpose of egg production? I don't know if that was a question for you, Lindsay, or Michelle, you want to take that on, or both?
I can respond, Lindsay.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. We've got quite a few backyard chicken producers here in Madison, and there are limits on the number of birds that you can manage. You also are not allowed to do any slaughter within the city limits. So my neighbor, for instance, has a farm friend, so she goes outside of the county with the chickens to slaughter them at the end of their natural lives. And there are issues around where to go for medical attention for birds, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay?
It's really different depending on where you are in the region. We have some very large counties in our region, many with an agrarian history and thriving rural economy. If you could take a place like Montgomery County, Maryland, for instance, which has set aside 1/3 of their land to preserve for farming and natural resource industries. Raising chickens in the rural part of the county is governed by a different set of zoning and other regulations than it would be, quote unquote, down county in a place like Silver Spring. In the district, chickens are permitted, I believe. I may not be completely up to date on this, but perhaps somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's regulated by lot size and setback, as it is in a lot of our municipalities. But the last I knew, the requirement for the lot size and setback was such that most backyards aren't actually of that size. I know that we have some different sets of provisions that govern things like farm animal visits to schools, but yeah, it's really different. And I think the food interest group APAs could be a good source of information for that. There's a lot of other databases and efforts that have gone into looking at a food and ag policy. There's a Growing Food Connections project, I believe it's called, that was based out of SUNY Buffalo. It should be on the Food Interest Group's webpage, which is one repository for policies that would address, I think, things like urban farm animals.
There was a really interesting movie that came out, if you'd like to watch a narrative of it, about a suburban Chicago family that decided they were going to raise their own chicken because their family got sick on commercial chicken. They show them both dealing with the chickens, realizing that raising chickens was costing them way more than the eggs were worth, trying to get a handle on managing the birds. It was very funny, actually. And then they go to their city council meeting to get permission to have these chickens. So it's a really interesting kind of a narrative look at it. The movie's called Food Patriots.
Okay, we'll have to look for that. Maybe we'll be able to post a link to our page on the archives for this, on that one. Okay, another question to kind of move forward here. What federal policies and programs are you hearing that are most important in promoting food system resiliency, particularly as it relates to soil health and climate resilience? What's available for larger farms versus urban farms? Either of you want to take?
Great question. Michelle, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the federal opportunities are, and I'm kind of drawing a blank on that. We've been doing a lot of work in the upper Midwest on those issues for some time. The Soil Conservation Service, now known as Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, was actually born in western Wisconsin due to the extreme soil erosion conditions there. That part of the state is basically very old mountains, very worn down mountains. So there's very steep slopes and deep valleys, and soil erosion is a really big issue there. NRCS has some programs that assist farmers to deal with some of the issues that they're contending with, like adding cover crops to hold soil in place. Much of the work on perennialization, which has been really key for holding the soil in place, has not been funded so much federally, although there are some EQIP technical standards for grazing, for instance. But we've also been looking at things like agroforestry, hazelnut production, aronia production, some new crops that might work. I know University of Minnesota has been working quite a bit with kernza, and we've done some work on that crop in Wisconsin as well. Kernza is basically a perennial wheatgrass with extremely deep roots and really good for holding a more prairie soil environment in place. I just want to put out there that some farm families I know have been contending with road washouts in a big way, and not just public road washouts, but their private roads. So for instance, one of my friends has a grazing herd on a back lot, and their private road to get to the back lot has washed out 4 times in the last 5 years, and they just can't keep it in place. And so they're trying to figure out what resources might be at their behest to help them either fix the road, reroute the road, rethink their entire flow of production on the farm.
Yeah, I think I would, to just add to that, Michael, I'd be thinking about, a couple organizations that may have a better sort of global response to that. question for the country, but I think in addition to a lot of work that NRCS has done, including incentivizing the planting of cover crops, which in the Chesapeake Bay has been incredibly important to helping to restore the health of the bay. And it's been heavily supplemented in some cases, especially in places like Maryland, for instance, with state funds to also support that. As far as urban farms, I think, you know, in terms of the local and regional food systems funding programs that are available through USDA, through the Ag Marketing Service, AMS, as well as NIFA, the National Institute for Food and Agriculture. A lot of those programs are leveraged by urban farm and food entrepreneurs. But on the soil side of things, I know they've done some work on it. I'm sure EPA has done some work on it. One of the things that the 2018 Farm Bill did is I believe that USDA is going to be forming an Office of Urban Agriculture. And so I think there's a better answer to that question, but I think we'll also see more resources available in the coming years.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. So here's a question for Michelle. Could you tease out the concept of analyzing food flow to promote more regional markets than relying on national markets?
Sure. So one of the things that's been happening for the last 20 years in particular is a concentration in the food system. I'll give you an example. So in our region, we had a 17-store food supermarket chain that then was sold to Roundy's, which then was sold to Mariano's out of Chicago. And 2 years ago, Mariano's sold that chain to Kroger, and Kroger is the second largest food company in the United States. So it used to be that if you had a new say you were a processor and you were like a young startup and you wanted to, you know, put your product into a store, you could go to the 17 chain owner and say, I've got this great new product, will you put it in your store? And they'd say, of course, you know, bring us a couple cases and we'll try it in this one store. As the supply chain concentrated and there were basically fewer owners and managers and people to handle product as the chain concentrated, then those small businesses were shut out because they would say, well, I don't know, maybe can you get us a half a truckload? Can you get us 5 pallets? Can you get us, you know, a semi-load every other week? And so smaller businesses are kind of left out in the cold in being able to get product to market. And that goes for vegetables as well as any kind of processed product, grass-fed beef or dairy, ethnic products. That's a really big issue of not having any place to take product and drop it for regional consumption. So even a very relatively large potato grower in Wisconsin has been unable to get into Chicago and can't even get into Madison. And you know, Madison's about 250,000 in the city proper and about 500K in the metro region. And without a proper scaled food warehouse system that allows for small as well as larger wholesale transactions, we just can't have a regional food system here. So this becomes an issue for farmers because that's where they're going to make money, is in selling wholesale. So again, using the Madison example, we've had a Dane County Farmers Market for, well, since 1972, I think, or 71, something like that. And 60, 70,000 people come to that farmers market every weekend during the growing season, but farmers are not making any money at that market because people come for the camaraderie, you know, tooling around and seeing their friends, have a cup of coffee, a piece of bakery, and that's it. They aren't buying much food. And so the farmers market has become kind of a place to get street cred as a known market. then those markets are using CSA delivery as a way of doing kind of research and development on their crops. What do people really like? What do I enjoy growing? What grows well? And where am I going to make some money? And then when they identify the crops where they're going to make money, they start selling those wholesale. Often it'll go first to restaurants, but then they'll start selling wholesale to individual stores. And because there are so very few independently owned grocery stores anymore, it's very hard for them to get into that wholesale market. So that's what we're facing here. As I said, you know, Lindsay's lucky. You've got your Maryland market, and we don't have anything like that. Our Chicago terminal market is has a reputation for not being the best place to try to sell anything into it. You know, and every region is going to have a different set of circumstances, opportunities, and constraints. So those are what we were facing here.
Okay, so as a follow-up, as you were saying that, another question came in, I think, based on what you were just saying. So given this example of the food chain and the ability of local farmers to enter the grocery chain, could a possible solution be advocating for local laws or other incentives to encourage more flexibility in the larger systems to allow those farmers to market to the local larger chain?
So the aggregation point is really critical. Having a place where a full truckload can drop product and sell it at that point, you know, at that aggregation point. It's that last mile delivery that makes it very unwieldy for a farmer to make any money. So for instance, we have farmers that have a full truckload that could deliver to 5 stores in Madison, except for that last mile delivery is so expensive and unruly because it requires a lot of time to make all those individual stops. So then that means that it becomes very expensive for them to do that. That distribution, that aggregation distribution point is really critical, and that's where product changes hands. Did I answer the question? I'm trying to remember exactly, because there was another point that I was going to make and I don't remember what it was.
I was talking about local laws or other incentives to encourage the flexibility.
So one of the issues with the distribution aggregation point is who sets the rules for that. And those governance rules are really critical. There are a number of places that might have a terminal space like that, but they're privately owned. And what we found is that once they're privately owned, it's very hard to make sure that public goals are addressed. So an example is Ontario Food Terminal Market has a very strong provincial connection to the market, and as a result, they require that the market always remain open for Ontario farmers to sell their product. The Ontario Farmland Protection Group is really actively involved in promoting the Ontario food terminals, specifically to maintain food sovereignty and market access for local farmers, so that the green space is protected. Another example would be where the public piece is missing, or maybe weaker than it should be, might be Hunts Point in New York, where the terminal market renters basically don't want any new renters. They want to shut it down and keep it just to the people who've been there all the time. And so there's no room for anyone new to come in. And so that's a place where, you know, when we're thinking about governance for a terminal market in Madison, we're thinking about how do we make sure that these are jobs that are well paid, possibly unionized. How do we make sure that there's alternative fuel at the terminal, that refrigeration is super efficient so we're not causing more greenhouse gas emissions than are necessary, those kinds of things. And if it becomes a fully privatized market, the city won't have any say.
Okay, as you were responding, go ahead, Lindsay.
Michael, could I add to that just really quickly on sort of the policies and laws and incentives piece? You know, we're seeing more of that, I would say, on the institutional side of things with like farm to school, for instance. And I do think that despite the role and the need for appropriately sized infrastructure for different types of farmers that Michelle has talked about a great deal, And we have some of those needs in our region. You know, the Maryland Food Center Authority is a great terminal market. We also have a lot of food hubs that have sprung up in and around our region to try to help find market channels for smaller farmers that historically may have had a harder time selling into the terminal market. But I think we're also going to need a set of policies that really help direct more of the food dollar to the farmer. Farming can be very expensive. It certainly is in our region, in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, for a whole variety of reasons. But we are seeing some really interesting things happen in farm to school. In the District of Columbia, for instance, we passed the Healthy Schools Act about 10 years ago, which does provide an additional 5 cents at school meals for local food, for breakfast and for lunch, for anybody that's participating in the National School Lunch Program. There are some legislators right now in the state of Maryland that have put together a task force to work with farmers and other stakeholders in the food system, distributors, to look at what types of policies could help incentivize more Maryland-grown food in Maryland state-level contracts. And I think that's a place where we're going to continue to see a lot of work and innovation. I certainly hope so, because we do need things to bridge the gap that I think we're seeing across the country between food affordability and farm viability, and what, you know, the farmer's ability to earn an income and a livable wage.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to, what Lindsay said reminded me of another piece that I forgot. That was a really important one, though. And the other one I wanted to mention was that Cory Booker and Mark Pocan have introduced federal legislation addressing food concentration and antitrust in food businesses. This is the second or third time they've introduced it, so I don't know that anything will happen this Congress. But it is a growing concern, and this is one of those issues that Equal Exchange is organizing on.
Okay, so earlier, Michelle, when you were talking, we got a couple comments of a similar vein about a number of supermarket companies, including Harris Teeter, that's owned by Kroger, and Giant in the DC region, tout their connection to and sales of food produced in the region by specific farms and farmers. And another saying, our local ShopRite, which is a bigger regional chain, highlights local production, even naming the source. So I guess something that's been going on to promote that.
Yeah, it's happening here too, but I can say that at least here in our markets in the upper Midwest, that some of their, it's a lot of talk and not a whole lot of follow through. So for instance, we've gone into markets where they've said it came from this farm or that farm, and it did not come from that. We know that it didn't come from that farm. And we've also had issues where the product says that it's local and seasonal, but it's like not local or seasonal, like lemons and avocados and stuff. We know that you know, basically the in-store management of those signs and that marketing piece don't really get the attention that they need to be realistic.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. What role does the banking system, particularly the farm credit system, play in the support and development of local food systems?
A big one. And I think, Michelle, you can probably speak to this a little bit more than I can, but there was a really good report that the Federal Reserve and U.S. Department of Agriculture put together a couple of years ago looking at this very question, called Harvesting Opportunity. But it's, you know, farm credit continues to be hugely important in local and regional food system development for a whole host of reasons. You know, one of which is there are a lot of different types of farmers that are engaged in local and regional food system development. you know, we didn't talk about dairy quite as much as I had hoped to, and the reason that I want to is because you know, I think if we just get a lot of our information about food and agriculture from the media, you know, there's a lot of messages about animal protein and fluid milk. And I don't know how much awareness we have of just how important those sectors of the agricultural economy are to our overall agricultural economy in the Northeast and in the Midwest. We were going to do some poll questions earlier just to see, you know, if folks had a sense of what the most important or the largest sectors of the largest parts of the ag economy were in the Northeast, and this is all USDA Census of Ag data that in some cases it's really packaged very nicely where you can see what the top receipt getters are. But dairy continues to be one of the largest industries in the Northeast, and it has a very high multiplier effect to other industries. And whether it's dairy or other types of commodity farmers, we do in our region, for instance, have a lot of farmers that are producing grain for the poultry industry on the Eastern Shore and also in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. But they also have, you know, we also have farmers that do both that, and they have diversified fruit and vegetables, and may have a farm stand or another market channel where they're selling those products.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a question for Michelle, but if you can both respond to it. And it says, you mentioned discussion about increasing recognition that agriculture, especially agroforestry, can advance carbon sequestration. How are people measuring soil capacity to do so?
Oh boy, that's a really big question, and it's somewhat controversial because I don't know that people have really figured out a methodology that everyone agrees with at this point. I did just recently download a paper that came out of Germany. They were looking at 30 or 40 different studies on carbon sequestration and trying to figure out what the messages were. I thought one of the upshots of that paper was that grazing animal systems, low input systems that rely on grazing, if you look at the full analysis of that system, that it actually is, it does reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and because of the sequestration involved in pasturing that just isn't there with corn and soybeans and growing other products, you know, alfalfa and more and other annual crops for feed. So I would just say that that's still out there. There's a lot of interest in it, a lot of research going on.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would just echo that. I think that this is an area where we're going to see a lot more information and research and innovation in the coming years. It is, like, I think, one of the hottest topics in agriculture right now for very good reason. You know, we've talked about some of the environmental benefits of managing soils, building complex soil structure. I've seen some really interesting examples from grain farms, particularly out west. But, you know, I think the other side of that, and maybe one of the things that we haven't really addressed quite as much as we should have on the webinar, is that certain parts of the farm economy right now are really in a fairly profound crisis, just in terms of debt levels, market access, weather, you name it. We are a little bit more, we're fortunate in kind of our area in terms of grain markets to have a really strong local regional demand for poultry, and so I think are buffered somewhat, although not completely, by some of the impacts that commodities are seeing as a result of trade issues right now. But I think, you know, just to sort of finish the thought on the healthy soil piece is there is a lot of, you know, really interesting discussion about, you know, can we recognize the monetary value that healthy soils could play in our society in serving as a carbon sink, and essentially incentivize and reward farmers for those production practices, to really kind of reinforce the social benefit that can come with that, but also to help diversify farm revenue.
Mm-hmm.
I just quickly say we have something in Maryland that's getting started called in the Chesapeake Bay, called the Million Acre Challenge, which a couple different organizations are involved in, but essentially it's a goal to get 1 million acres into certain types of soil management, what is the word I'm looking for, systems that are going to build healthy, complex soils.
Okay, so we have time for just a couple more questions, and so I'll move on to this one. How do we better tie the efficiencies at regional scales outlined in the Tech and Human organization Michelle has identified with the regional environmental services that can be rewarded and enhanced at the city and region scale?
Could you say that again?
Sure.
That was a really complicated question.
Yeah, I'll read a little slower too.
Okay.
How do we better tie the efficiencies at regional scales outlined in the Tech and Human organization that you identified with the regional environmental services that can be rewarded and enhanced at that city region scale?
Yeah, it's that issue of what's the sweet spot between efficiency and diversity. And I am not sure that we really understand where that sweet spot is yet. I think we've, when I talk to a lot of CSA growers, they're like, we are way too diverse. We're not making any money. We've got way too complex of farming systems on our farm to be able to make a go of it. The labor is really complex. The number of market channels is really, really complex. And then on the other hand, we've still got corn and soybean growers who maybe are growing 3 years of corn in a row with no cover crops. So trying to figure out what that middle space looks like is, we've got a ways to go before we can really say we've defined it. Lindsay?
I think I would say that this is where the Chesapeake Foodshed Assessment would be a great resource that has some really, I think, constructive recommendations on some of the things that we need to put in place to address that. I know, one of the things that I hope that as we move to put together this multi-stakeholder regional commission involving some of our policymakers together with, our established and emerging farm business leaders, advocates, food entrepreneurs, community-based organizations. One of the recommendations is that we need some kind of network coordinator, if you will, for regional food systems projects that would have some financing authority. And I don't think I should say a whole lot more. I'm very familiar with the Foodshed Assessment, but not nearly as much as the authors. We have something like that in part of our region, I think, and I do think having an entity that could help with this food and ag economic development, but that also has a policy forum so that we can bring some of these issues that I think we've conventionally thought of as being rural agricultural issues more into our metropolitan areas to make those connections and really make visible how a policy change in a city like DC could benefit farmers elsewhere is going to be really critical. I think there's a lot that's happening on the urban food system side that's really, really exciting. Different, ways of growing food, different places to grow food, different products that are being experimented with. But I also think that we would be remiss if we did not think about how our urban farmers are or could be connected. In many cases, I see a lot of connections already to their counterparts in our suburban and rural communities to, work together on business and other opportunities.
I could say really quickly, because I know we're almost out of time, I would say we need more collaboration, we need better access to capital, and better workforce development, especially 12-month jobs that are decent work. So if you've got a seasonal farm job, what are you going to do for the other months? How do you put those together to make a stronger rural economy?
Okay. All right, one last question. So when you compare what is actually being eaten at the table with what is being grown on local or regional farms, there seems to be a drastic difference. What ways can you suggest to promote growing and eating local food that people will actually eat?
It's funny, I always think of it from the other point of view. It's like, why are we growing so much corn and soybeans? Because people aren't eating that. I mean, most of our acreage goes to those crops, and much of our federal support money and our state efforts go to those crops. And the food that we actually eat farmers who grow it have very little support for growing fruits and vegetables and even grain for bread and things like that. So I kind of would flip that on its head.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a harder question than it sounds like, but I think, take a look at what incentives are or are not in place to promote that, to incentivize that. At the end of the day, farming is a business, and most farmers are going to respond to where there's a market opportunity.
Well, and also there's all those social issues that agriculture and food can't deal with, like people have to have enough time to cook their food. They have to have enough money and access to purchase that food. I am still one of those people who buys cans of beans instead of making them from scratch, even though I know it's a fraction of the cost, because I just don't have the time, and not everybody has those opportunities. They might not have good health. There are all sorts of other issues that come into thinking about food systems.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, with that, we'll conclude our webinar today, Improving Resiliency Through Planning and Investment in Place-Based Food Systems. I'd like to offer a great thank you to Lindsay Smith, who I've been talking to for more than a year about setting up today's webinar, and to Michelle, who I've been talking to since yesterday. Thanks for filling in for Phil Gottwals. And thanks also to Phil. We will be talking with him to see if we might follow up with another webinar with him. I also like to thank John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who helps to make all this happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org later this week. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. Keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and our weekly e-newsletter for details on future webinars, including one next week with Alana Bruce of Recast City, not Rehaven. She's going to be doing one on Bring Back Main Street with small scale manufacturing, the who, the why, and the how. Have a great day.